Hey, welcome back to another Bitcoin Reformation Podcast. Ben Haupt here with my friends David Rufner, Jared Townley. Great to be with you again. I just got back from Africa and I was excited to hear a little bit about what Africa is doing. And so two quick things that I'll pass along. First was I was so impressed with this program, this approach to life, this company called M-PESA, M-PESA. In Kenya is where it started. You can pay just about anybody with nothing but a cell phone. So you put money on your SIM card, and then you can text money through M-PESA to anybody. So my driver that picks me up in Nairobi from the airport, he's thirsty and he stops off to the side of the road, and there's a gal there selling bottles of water. And he says, "I'll take a bottle of water." And she says, "What's your phone number?" And she gives him her phone number, and then he just sends her however much it was for this bottle of water, and off we go. And I said, "So how do I get in on this thing? Is there a website?" No, there's not a website. You have to go to a cell phone provider and you give them money and they put it on your SIM card, and then you're good to go. There's a new program that ties into M-PESA, and you can actually pay with Bitcoin in M-PESA, the same technology. So what I learned while I was in Africa is that they are way ahead of the US on payment channels, and they're way more ready to accept Bitcoin as a instrument for payment than what the US is with our fumbling credit cards. We think we're hot stuff because we have these new chips in our credit cards, but of course, Europe has had those for 10 years, and they've been doing tap way longer than the US. Frankly, the US is we're a third world country when it comes to payments. And so that's what I learned about Bitcoin and payments while I was in Africa. David, what's new with you?
What's new with me? Well, we're having an incredibly mild winter here up at 7,000 feet in Big Bear, California, which I'm loving from my day to day. I'm able to hit the trails almost daily. I've got a mileage goal this year, whether walking, hiking, running, that I'm trying to hit, increase it from last year. So I love that, but it's bad. I have not been skiing once this season, and it's just a bad year for the slopes. It's a bad year for a town like ours. That said, with it so mild, I'm already thinking ahead towards this summer. And a calendar reminder came up today, and I just before joining you gentlemen applied for my permit along with three others to hike up Mount Whitney on the eastern side of the Sierra. So that's a goal of mine. I bracketed it. I'll try for a one-day permits. I'll try for 2-day overnight permits, and we shall see. So that's happening. That's exciting. It'll be me and three others. So I am accepting the highest Bitcoin bidders to come join me should I secure the permits. But I'm kind of excited about that, thinking summer thoughts. At the same time, in terms of my own personal life and Bitcoin, our junior in college at Concordia University, Irvine, who's a part of a finance investing club, called me up very sheepishly the other day, and he said that the club's wondering if you would be willing to come down to sometime this spring and talk with us about Bitcoin. And I'm loving it. I'm just like, I can't even tell you how good it is. So I'll keep you posted on that. Apart from that, family, really, we're blessed and doing well. You know, hiccups in life, weeds in the garden, but the love of God in Christ and mutual love for each other are maybe not our favorite words, but I'm sure our most used words in our family, like yours, is "I'm sorry, please forgive me." And it's just one of those moments where I can say, boy, this gospel that God lavishes upon us, then we have between us, and then watching my kids grow, I just love it in the fabric of our family life. So there you go. I'll say that.
David, I have in mind that this great meme where the dad is sitting with his little girl on the lap and the little boy is down on the floor playing, and there's some banter back and forth between the dad and the daughter, and the son says effing legend about his dad. That's what came to mind when you were telling that story.
Yeah.
Proud moment.
Okay, away from me. How about you, Jared?
I just love that, David. I've thought about too here where I work, like how could I like do a Bitcoin club? Like, do you think our K through 8th grade would like show up for something like that? I don't know. Something that I've
maybe make it
about.
a little broader, just about money and the world, anyways.
Yeah. Anyway, so things here in PA are good. I think, again, I'm always looking for the kid stories, and it seems like we have not recorded in forever. So for those of you that are watching, it might not seem like that long, but we have not really recorded since the beginning of January, I think. And it's February 4th now today. So kids grow fast in that time. And my son, who is a year and a half, I think now, he has really started like becoming super vocal and parroting all the words that you say and all those sort of things. So that's super fun to hear him just try and say things. And so, for example, he says chout. So instead of watch out, he has shortened it to chout, chout. And he kind of tells us to get out of the way. But then one of his favorite things is he has fully realized he can direct and control. And so he will take his finger, point it to a spot in the ground and say, sit, sit, sit.
Yeah.
And he's directing you to come sit, or he'll point at things and say, dada, dada, and like point at stuff. And it is such a delight to, right now is the point in life where I'm delighted to obey his every command because it is so cute and I love him so much. So that's just super fun in that way. Having family around is always good to see the kids interact with their grandparents, just kind of special times in that way too. So things are really well here. I want to kind of go backwards now through our sort of circle here. Usually we've recorded so far in advance that we try and not timestamp ourselves, that we really try and be not even sort of engaging with current news. But in the last month and change, there has been so much that has happened in the Bitcoin world, in the United States, about Bitcoin and crypto in general, that I think it would be fun for us to kind of go back around and say what is one of the biggest pieces of news, in our opinion, that has happened since we've last recorded. So, David, I'll let you go first. Ben, you go after that, and then I'll close us out.
Yeah, I'm so very interested in stories and what I think is data points, hopefully signal that represents increased adoption of Bitcoin, adoption in conversations, adoption by individuals, adoption by companies. But then, above companies now, we get adoption by, political entities, which is to say different sovereigns from nations, certainly, but also states. And I was just trying to look for, I've got a map here. Suddenly, I think there was maybe one in November and maybe a couple by December 31st, but states where legislation is being proposed at a state level, sometimes in committee, sometimes now out of committee, up, it's looking for a moment to really come before the whole assembly, let's say, or one of two assemblies, and then ultimately governor, let's say, but where there's legislation to make Bitcoin part of the strategic state reserve, and in some cases, make it fully legal, fully kosher, put a stamp of approval on the state pension funds also holding Bitcoin as part of their reserve asset, undergirding their promises to future years, present workers in future years of support for them in their retirement. So I'm watching this happen. Again, it went from one or two in, let's say, November, December, and now it's up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's not even up to date. I don't know why this one's up to date because we've got it from Arizona, Utah, Wyoming, the Dakotas. We've got Texas, Nebraska, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, several eastern states. But we've also now got a western state, Oregon, is taking place. So I'm watching this with a lot of intrigue. There's a lot of attention also on the nation, our new president, what executive orders or legislation might eventually come down for the same at a national level. But I tend to think it's going to happen at a state level first. And so it's interesting to see. And once it happens with one state, I don't know. I think California will drag our feet. But if it happens in enough states, we've talked about this before, there's this fear of missing out, FOMO, this game theory that takes effect. Well, I don't want to miss out, you know. So I'm watching that. That really has me intrigued right now.
Yeah, the interesting thing that I have been following is Larry Fink. If you don't know who Larry Fink is, you need to understand who this individual is, because frankly, I think that he's more powerful than Donald Trump. He is he's the CEO of BlackRock, the world's largest investment firm. And he said at the World Economic Forum a couple of weeks ago in Davos that he expects sovereign wealth funds to be buying Bitcoin. And he said that Bitcoin should be $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 per Bitcoin. The reason that we have a Bitcoin ETF is because Larry Fink of BlackRock worked very hard to get the ETF cleared through the SEC. And once he did, then the floodgates opened and everybody else followed. So he starts talking about sovereign wealth funds, which when he was talking about it, I think only Norway or maybe Sweden had a sovereign wealth fund. And now all of a sudden these countries are you can't hold them back fast enough from creating a sovereign wealth fund. Donald Trump just signed this into order. Trump is following. And the one that is leading is Larry Fink, and he is the one that is saying this is okay and this is not okay. And if Larry Fink, the world's largest investment firm CEO, says Bitcoin is going to be worth $500,000, $600,000, $700,000, then buying any amount of Bitcoin at $100,000, this is not investment advice, but you should listen to Larry Fink. And if he thinks it's going to 5 or 6 or 7x what it is now, it would seem to me to be bad advice to say Larry Fink doesn't know what he's talking about.
Right.
I love the best part about that, Ben, was that was only at a 2 or 5%, I think, was the formula he was using. Like, if they only allocated 2 to 5% of their portfolio to it, then this would be the outcome. But that doesn't even take into account what happens if maybe 10% becomes the normal number, or 20, or whatever.
Right. If there's an arms race in Bitcoin.
Right. Absolutely.
So go ahead. You go ahead. Sorry.
I'm going to take us somewhere else, but I think the important thing that both Ben and David have said so far too is we're not just here to like see the price go up, right? I think that's the thing here. These news things are actual about adoption, are about people using Bitcoin, right? That we're not only just interested in number go up. So the thing that I am most interested in, go ahead, David.
I was going to say one more signal to go. Not only did Larry Fink say this, but my local friend here, just bought into Bitcoin for the first time. So it's happening in Davos. It's happening in Big Bear. It's happening in Irvine. It's happening. But go ahead.
It's a worldwide thing, right? So one of the things that I have found very helpful, I think, when we think about, David, you said adoption, when we think about the future, that Bitcoin is the best money for everyone. And so that means it's the best money, the best savings not just for individuals, but also for banks, for corporations, etc. And so under the previous administration, the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission, issued what's called a staff accounting bulletin. And these are they're not supposed to be formal rulemaking, law, precedent setting sort of things, but this very much was. And they told banks that if they wanted to custody Bitcoin, that they could, but that they had to do one thing, that every time they took Bitcoin, they had to then buy or hold something else to then make sure that that Bitcoin was checked by a different resource. So the fancy word would be they had to hold it as a liability. And so that means if I sent, I don't know, Bank of America $100 of Bitcoin, they would then have to buy or somehow procure $100 of US dollars or treasuries or something to sort of check that Bitcoin that I've held. And in the way in which today's banks work, that's just not going to happen. It essentially prohibits all banks from custodying, from holding, from being involved in the Bitcoin network, the Bitcoin system, if you will, at all. And so with the new administration, with Hester Peirce being a part of this too, she's always been super anti the old SEC, has really spoken out against some of these things like SAB, Staff Accounting Bulletin 121. Now they have done away with that. And so banks can now hold Bitcoin as an asset, which means they don't need to then hold something else in place of also having that Bitcoin. And so if that doesn't make any sense to you, what you need to hear is now banks can hold Bitcoin in a way that they prefer to hold things, and it won't be a stumbling block to them. And why is that important? Well, I don't know about you. The most of the ways that I hold money and things like that is at a bank. I don't have money in my mattress. So you can come try and rob my house if you want to, but you're not going to find any cash under my bed, right? And so even though we here at the Bitcoin Reformation Podcast might encourage you to actually self-custody your Bitcoin, to take control of it yourself, I think we're not prideful enough or not arrogant enough to say that everyone is going to do that. And so there will need to be places, institutions, banks that will be able to hold this for people and then help them live in the Bitcoin world. And so when I think about the important things that have happened, as far as adoption, I mean, think about the banking system in the United States. It's what we all live in. It's what we all operate under and with. And so if they are now able to actually hold that, to me, that's like a floodgate that now is being open for people to have access, and maybe in a way that is much less scary, much less so new, because, well, I can buy some Bitcoin at Chase, or they can hold it for me. So that's what I'm just really intrigued, I think is the word I'm going to use, what this will mean going forward. So David, what do you think?
I agree with you. Although our listeners might say, apart from the bank holding it for me, in other words, them keeping it secure for me, as opposed to me hiding it in my mattress and not being able to sleep at night, that might be how somebody's feeling. Why else might a bank do it? Because if a bank holds it, you might be able to then do things with the bank holding that for you. With that in mind, I worked up a spreadsheet about 6-8 months ago that looked at the purchase price of my house when we bought it in June of 2020 compared to now. It supposedly on the open market, it costs or is worth 40% more in US dollars. People are like, that's wonderful, David. I'm like, it's not wonderful. I've got kids who are almost 21, 18, 16, 14. I need them to get affordable housing in the next decade. It's not really that wonderful. So, but nevertheless, I priced that purchase price of the home as well as the current valuation of the USD of the home in Bitcoin. And in both cases, it's dropped by like 80 to 85% when priced in Bitcoin. Amazing. But I did something different recently. I had like a spark. I've been wanting to tell you guys about this. I said, wait a second, time out. What if my lender helped me get in the home? I owed my lender, I'm going to pick a number. I've heard like maybe the average American home price or median, I forget which, but it's somewhere around $400,000. Let's say the loan was $400,000. I said, what if every mortgage payment, instead of giving them X amount of dollars, I'm on a 25-year. It's low rate, kind of long. I'm proud and not proud at the same time. So I kept the rate, and I kept the duration the same time. But what if instead of paying them US dollars, every mortgage payment, I bought that US dollar amount of Bitcoin and sent it to my lender? Now, here's where the ifs begin to stack up. What if the lender actually just held on to all that Bitcoin and said, at such a time that the US dollar value of that Bitcoin exceeds the original mortgage by, you pick your percentage, or maybe they compounded over the years, we will consider the loan satisfied. Here's the reality. I am 4.5 years in on a 25-year mortgage in US dollars. If I had been doing that, buying Bitcoin and handing it to my lender, and if my lender had been stacking it, the value of that Bitcoin stack right now, 4.5 years in, would be within $45,000 of satisfying that mortgage, which will likely happen this year. Less than a 5-year payment on a mortgage. So why might I also custody Bitcoin in a bank in the future? Because maybe the bank allows me to lend against it and then and pay it back. I mean, it's really remarkable. You're absolutely right, Jared. I'm only scratching the surface and beginning to learn myself, because I'm just a little passer guy, right? Learning the financial world. I think you're exactly right. This is a big deal.
Yeah, when you think about cost of funds, which is an interesting way to think about money, that there's a cost to getting money. If you're let's say your mortgage is 7-8% these days, we looked at housing this summer, and those were ballpark 6.25 was the lowest that we found, and kind of a special deal. But let's say 7 or 8%. If that's your cost of funds to fund the debt for your mortgage, I mean, if you're only paying 6 or 7% compound annual interest, and your Bitcoin is going up, 100%,
60.
Most people will conservatively say, okay, let's just say it's going up only 50% compound average growth rate. Even if your Bitcoin is going up 50%, you're way better off to keep your Bitcoin and to just take on that measly 7% of a loan than you are to pay off your loan in some kind of lump sum, fork over all your Bitcoin. So I think of it as cost of funds, and 7% cost of funds. That's phenomenal compared to what Bitcoin is going up.
There's so many cool things I think we could run down here too. I listened to a podcast. No, you're good. That talked about Bitcoin life insurance. That basically, I'm gonna try and summarize this well. I apologize if I butcher it, but basically, you buy a policy in a certain amount of Bitcoin because they're 100% Bitcoin focused denominated, and then you get that payout at your death in that Bitcoin that you paid for. So if I want a 10 Bitcoin policy, I pay for it. I think now it was if my mind and memory's right, and then on what the Bitcoin price is now. But in 30 years, whatever that 10 Bitcoin is worth, that would be my payout at the end of my life insurance policy. And so you think about sort of trajectory of price, history, compound annual growth. It's kind of like this could just transform the financial system, insurance. I mean, just so many things. And so I think, Ben, you talking about what'd you call it? The purchase of funds?
Cost of funds.
Cost of funds is a good transition into what we're going to talk about now that we're 25 minutes in. We're going to try and address what I think is one of the most frequently asked questions, at least that I've had, sort of thing sometimes when we think about Bitcoin. I almost said baptism for some reason. And hopefully try and give some people some easy answers or some easy hooks, right? So there's a few people, let me just tell a little story, that came to me and said, hey, I've seen my neighbor posting, they made so much money on this thing called crypto. Do you know anything about crypto? Like, should I buy some of that? Like, and I just want to say, like, well, how much time do you have? The short answer is no, but like, can I explain to you why? And so we're going to try and answer sort of the basic thing, why Bitcoin and not crypto? And I know that for some people, this means that, well, we're short-sighted, all those sort of things, but we're going to make our case why we would say that you should, if you were going to buy something, not that this is investment advice, but if I was thinking about what I am buying, I am not buying anything but Bitcoin. So I want to start with sort of a simple dollar place, like a analogy of dollars and how much savings it actually procures, and they maybe get into some sort of technicalities around what is a crypto, what makes Bitcoin different as a cryptocurrency, and then kind of talk a little bit about Bitcoin's beginnings too. So first, we're going to start here with the value, because we've kind of already done this in some of our previous episodes, but I think this is helpful again to bring up in this point. So why Bitcoin and not everything else? So first, I want to start with the Mag 7 comparison here. And so this is a chart from Check on Chain. There's a whole bunch of charts there that you can go and look at. And what this chart shows is it picks the date of January 1st, 2020 with the top big 7 stocks in the United States, and then charts it up through January 1st of 2025. And what it does on the left side here, if you're just listening, it shows the percent index or the percent increase of price from then, from January to January in those 5 years. And so when you're looking at it, you see there's Nvidia, Microsoft, Apple, Meta, Tesla, Google, Amazon, just the regular S&P, the NASDAQ, all those sort of things. Those are all up around 200% or so, if I'm reading this right. But then there are a few that are higher than Bitcoin. That there are some that have returned better than Bitcoin in the last 5 years. So Nvidia is there, at least when this chart was made. I don't know, with all the recent stuff going on around DeepSeek and stuff like that if that's the same today. But then Tesla also is very much on that same pace as far as returns. But what does that mean? That means, though, if you bought the S&P 500, if you bought QQQ, if you bought the NASDAQ, you have missed out, if you will, on a large percentage of gains in your portfolio, in your savings, because it wasn't in Bitcoin. So that's just TradFi sort of stuff, traditional finance. But let's look at this one. You guys should see I had to put in a different word in front of a coin there. So this is from the same place, Check on Chain. And this is important as we're trying to think about why Bitcoin, not crypto. And so this compares different cryptocurrencies. So things like Ethereum, Solana, Litecoin, Bitcoin Cash, Dash. I mean, there's a whole bunch. Ripple is on here, Cardano, Doge. There's a whole bunch of different ones. There's over millions of these things now. And what it does is it charts their price compared to Bitcoin. And so what you should see here is that all of these prices, even if they might have, well, sometimes it's actually done a little better than Bitcoin, or it's gone up against Bitcoin, that eventually they're all kind of going down and to the right, that they're all losing value compared to Bitcoin. And so what the takeaway I want you to have there is that even from just a valuation point, that there might be times at which some altcoin, these are anything that's not Bitcoin, is and does go up in US dollar terms. We have to remember that if we're advocating, talking about Bitcoin, then we have to denominate it in Bitcoin and look at it over time. And that when we do that, when we look at it over time, most everything, I don't think I can say this, most everything has not constantly reached a new all-time high against Bitcoin. That even in today's market, Ripple is up a whole bunch compared to Bitcoin, but it still, I don't think, has reached its all-time high against the Bitcoin pair, which is wild if you consider how old and how much Bitcoin has grown over those courses. So first reason why Bitcoin only is, well, if you're interested in long-term savings, if you're interested in preserving your capital, preserving your working hours, your working energy for the future, well, not yet. There's not been a single altcoin a single other cryptocurrency that has ever existed that has done as good as Bitcoin has over the long term. I'll stop there. Go ahead, guys.
Yeah, my experience with all this, I mean, I remember when Ethereum, the first altcoin, the first blockchain-based cryptocurrency other than Bitcoin, came to Coinbase. I was on Coinbase. I was already following cryptocurrency. And I think when Ether hit Coinbase, it was somewhere around $15 a coin. And I could sympathize with. I've talked to a couple of friends over the years that got into cryptocurrency and they felt like they were too late to Bitcoin because they see the number that Bitcoin's worth and then they see these other cryptocurrencies and they're worth much less and they think, oh, I'm going to get in on this next coin because I was too late to get to Bitcoin. So I remember seeing $15 a coin and thinking, holy cow, that's a lot less than Bitcoin. Why don't I just invest in Ether? And there were some very simple things that I began to learn about cryptocurrencies. So, for example, just knowing how many Ether exist versus how many Bitcoin versus how many Ripple. So this is called the tokenization of a coin, and you probably know by now that there can only be 21 million Bitcoin. How many Ether can there be? Well, it's way more than 21 million, and the number actually keeps going up. How many Ripple XRP will there ever be? Well, that number is a lot bigger than Bitcoin, but it's still going up. So what I learned pretty quickly is, yeah, there's going to be, you can buy these tokens, and I bought Cardano and Litecoin and all these different coins. My experience is just that, frankly, I lost money on every single one of those. I bought, and they still haven't hit the heights that they were at in 2017. So I can sympathize with people that were sort of midway into cryptocurrency and said, "Ooh, I'm going to find the next Bitcoin." And what I want to say is, unfortunately, there isn't the next Bitcoin. To quote a guy named Michael Saylor, there is no second best. Bitcoin is so unique in its properties that even though you think you're going to front run this and find the next great investment, Bitcoin is so unique that we're not probably going to have another one of those kind of moments. And so then I've just had to humble myself and realize, whoa, you get Bitcoin at whatever price you deserve it at. And once you kind of humble yourself and realize, oh, there isn't a second best to Bitcoin, then you just buy Bitcoin at whatever price you can get it at. And if that's 100,000 and you can only buy 100th or 1,000th, it's better off than having zero Bitcoin. That's how I think about it.
I'll add a couple things. Again, there's that unit bias. $100,000. I can't do that. I can't do that. Nobody here can do it. We can't do that. Or I can get this for $1.32. So there's that. But what you really want to pay attention to is the monetary policy of the coin. How many are there total? Is it capped? Oftentimes the founders, who are still in place as heads of company, have things like 80% of the initial supply. That's really interesting. So they'll be able to leverage that. They'll be able to sway and move the markets. And they're not going to sway and move the markets to my benefit or yours. They're going to sway it to theirs. Now, if I can time it just right, my upside, I mean, it's like playing the best slot machine in Vegas, most certainly. But also, like Vegas, the sober person needs to remember that the house always wins. A few gamblers will win big, but on the whole, people will lose. People will lose. So that I also think both the stock and the altcoins, the crap coins, the whatever, are similar in this regard also. And it's a whole another side of the conversation, what they call counterparty risk. If Mark Zuckerberg goes out and does something really stupid tomorrow, the stock price will fall. Nvidia, which has performed incredibly well. Do people realize Nvidia owns none of their own manufacturing facilities? They have huge risk just in the relationships they need to have with others. We've got possible tariff wars starting. This will change the ability of like Nvidia to both produce and ship and sell. And we call all those things counterparty risk. And part of the counterparty risk of those altcoins are the founders who are still in place. What could they do that's silly? The lack of a hard cap, the amount of supply that the founders still have, all this sort of thing. And Bitcoin's just not like that. It just isn't. It started in very humble beginnings, wasn't worth anything. It was a thought. It was a thought experiment that eventually became valuable over time. Nobody can change the supply. The supply issuance is at a fixed rate, which is proven to us every 10 minutes and then every 4 years when that rate does ultimately adjust. It's entirely decentralized. All the things make Bitcoin a different species. So that's the strong claim I think the three of us would like to make. It is truly of a different species. Now, that can be harder. Somebody can say, I can hear your conviction, I just don't understand it yet. I'd say, go do your homework. Go do your homework then some more, or reach out to us on the side and let's talk about it more. But you've given some great examples, Jared. Over time, they're all trending down and to the right, whereas Bitcoin's going up and to the right. And that's just so very different. The altcoins also, you're playing today and you're playing a fast game, a right now game, right? You're having to look at the charts. I look at the Bitcoin charts a lot. I do. It's true. But not because I'm actually making decisions a lot. I'm just interested in what's happening with it. With the altcoins, you better watch those charts so that you can make a lot of fast decisions, which will also, as you come in and out of altcoins and the like, you're going to create for yourself a lot of taxable events too. Bitcoin has a taxable event at sale, the capital gains. But I personally do not know a single Bitcoin day trader. I just don't know that person. And so it's of a different species.
And I think that's a phrase that a lot of people say, there's Bitcoin and there's everything else. And those analogies of casinos and gambling, and I've used the example myself as sort of venture capital, right? So in the United States, we have rules and laws that protect most normal people from investing in initial sort of companies, right? Like companies that are growing and trying to get funding because of the fear of loss and those sort of things. But in crypto, they don't really care. They are more than willing for you to buy their token, so that then later we would use the phrase dump it on you, which just simply means to sell a large amount and then make that price go down dramatically, and then thereby you lose all of your savings, those sort of things. So I want to go next to, David, a phrase that you said, humble beginnings, because I think this is a helpful way to think about the difference between Bitcoin and literally everything else. We've told a story here a couple of times now that Bitcoin was created by anonymous persons, right? Release the code into the wilderness, so to say, into the wild, to be ran, to be tested even. And there was no initial, like we call it a pre-mine. So Satoshi Nakamoto did not say, well, I'll take about 50% of this stuff for myself first, and then I'll give the rest away to everybody else. He ran the code just like anyone else would be required to mine those new Bitcoins when the network was just being put out. There's no venture capital behind it, right? So there's a meme in the Bitcoin world, Bitcoin CEO to raise Bitcoin price, right? There is no one that is pulling levers and doing those sort of things behind the scenes, right? That's what the open source software is about, that there are developers who work together with the community to maintain, and to maybe add a few things here or there, but there is no company, there's no corporation behind it. It wasn't funded by shady backwater sort of companies, trying to get an arm in before everybody else, where almost every altcoin that you see today, David talked about this, but we just saw it too. Trump coin, right? It was super huge for about literally 3 days. And they held 80%, I believe, 80% of the supply. And so what that means is that if there is 100 coins to be able to be sold, bought, whatever, they held 80 of them, and then the market got the 20. But then that means once that price goes up, they can say, thank you, goodbye, and they can cash out on all those 80s, and now those poor 20 people are left with whatever they have left. And so it's I think we would go so far as to say it's a dishonest, not transparent way to sort of deal with others and live together, even in that language. And so go ahead.
Jared, yeah, just think of that. If there's 100 of something and you own 80 of them, and by the way, these types of tokens it was just signaled today by the SEC that the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, does not see them as securities. They're definitely not commodities. They're going to be considered as collectibles, which actually reminds me, Ben, of a Beanie Baby conversation way, way back. Okay, exactly. But let's pretend there's 100 Beanie Babies. I own 80 of them, and a lot of people want them. There's very little supply out there beyond what's locked up with me, and so they're becoming valuable. And so what do? In one day, I sell half of mine. I sell 40 of them. I sell them high. Immediately, the market dumps, and everybody says, oh, it's dying, it's lost. But what do? I go back, and now I've got enough money to buy 50 back. I sold 40. I buy 50 back. Now I might own 90 out of 100. And everybody sees the price skyrocket again. They're now clamoring for those last 10. Price goes up. I can keep manipulating the market like this, at least for a while, until people realize this is a dishonest game and I'm nothing but a loser. I'm leaving the game, or at some point, me with 90, I'm going to cash out permanently, right? I'm not going to manipulate it to the top side again. I'm just going to cash out permanently. This happens. Maybe not at such a kind of a silly example. There's only 100 units and somebody's got 80, but they did have 80% of the supply. So it is a decent analogy, and it's just not a game you really want to play unless you're fine truly gambling. Like, I'm fine losing, but I'm hoping to have a big payday to brag to my buddies on the golf course, right? It's just not so much of our conversation about what we love about Bitcoin, we've said this in the past, has to do with our vocations, actually, of caring for the people in our lives, of stewarding that which has been given for us, of being prepared to care for these same people in the days and years ahead. Participating with these altcoins, I'll go so far as to say, just doesn't sit well with the person who says, God has loved me in Christ freely, at great cost to him, nothing to me. He's deeply, daily, richly blessed me with this body and life and these people, and I want to care for them. That stewarding mindset, which is a fruit, I would say, of our life with God in Christ, just doesn't sit well with those altcoins.
Absolutely. And I think too, just the way in which it's just so different. So the initial way it was made, the way in which it is existing even today, that sure, there are some cryptocurrencies that are trying to become decentralized, trying to sort of take that, hey, there's no one who singularly is in control. But as much as some people might say Bitcoin's really young, we could say, well, that's fine, but we know Bitcoin is that way. We know Bitcoin is not run by a single person who can't just pull the lever without us being aware of this, all those sort of things. And so it's just such a different beginning, but also one that is continuing to be left out. So next place I want to go is I think, maybe you can help me on this one. I think Jeff Booth is the one that I've heard talk most about this. I think he calls it the crypto trilemma, or I've heard it said somewhere, I forget where, to be honest, that as a cryptocurrency, you have to choose two of three things. And so it's one of those, you can't have it all. You have to prioritize two of these three things. And the three options are this: security, scalability, and decentralization. And so what he's saying is that you can't choose decentralization and security and scalability, that you have to prioritize two of those and then leave the other one, or knowingly say, I'm not going to focus on that. And so Bitcoin has chosen two of those things. Bitcoin has chosen decentralization and security. I don't know the exact number, guys. I'd be curious if you could find that, how many transactions can happen in a day. I don't remember, but it's
a low number.
Yeah, it's a very low number. And so it is a very common critique of Bitcoin that, hey, the whole world can't use this because there is no way it could handle everyone paying, everyone making transactions, everyone doing this on what we would call the base layer of Bitcoin. And they're right. That's okay. We're willing to admit that. We're willing to say yes to that because of the benefits of focusing on security and decentralization. And so what makes Bitcoin different between that and then other cryptocurrencies is they usually, at least what I see, is they focus on scalability a lot. That is the big one that I see a lot of other cryptocurrencies talking about, focusing on, hey, the whole world can transact on this. We can do 100,000, transactions in a second, whatever. But then what they lose out on, usually then they'll choose security, right? They want to make sure that your funds are safe, that only you can control them, only you can spend them or send them somewhere else. And so they lose out on decentralization. And so what that means then is that there is one organization, one corporation that is in charge of running, maintaining, running maintenance on, keeping track of transactions, all those sort of things. It feels like it's been a while, but a couple of years ago, back in the last crypto cycle, the last Bitcoin bull run, it seemed like every 2 days, Solana would literally go down. So this is like, imagine you're on the internet, and we just had this a couple months ago, trying to go to Google, and it just says server not found. But imagine that with your money. So imagine going to a bank and trying to buy something, and it just says, sorry, can't, doesn't work. Imagine not being able to access or to know your funds were safe even. Is somebody hacking me right now? What is going on? And so that's just one example of the problems of that decentralization, but they can't do all of those things together. So Bitcoin is different because it chooses and prioritizes decentralization, that nobody else can control it, that it is fully spread, if you will, apart. The power is equally distributed across all network participants, but yet it's also very secure, that no one can send your funds, no one can steal your funds unless you give them the ability to do so. So, David, did you find how many transactions Bitcoin can do?
Yeah, I did. And I found another set of transactions as well. As of 2024, it's right around 500,000 transactions per day, okay? I should look up how much value is being transacted daily. What's the total cleared value? I didn't look that up. However, it's worth saying that the biggest settlement network existing in American life is something called the FedWire Fund. I can wire funds to you. I don't know if you've ever wired funds. It's not a fun process. You got to do it during bank days, no holiday. You pay a fee. It's slow. Anyways, the FedWire does larger tranches of money between banks, and they can only do 770,000 transactions a day, and yet settle around $4.35 trillion per day. So if you can settle enough large amounts of dollars at that base layer, you and I aren't invited into the FedWire funds, and yet activities that we've done have been settled through there. Our lives are built on layers above that, you could say. So if you have a strong base layer, even though it's lower volume of transactions, if it can clear high amounts of value, you're still in the clear. There's something really wonderful about keeping your foundation simple and plodding forward, because you can build, the race car on top. You can account for what it's missing in that trilemma that you shared, which is scalability with other layers on top of it. But if you try to do scalability at that base layer, as you pointed out, you're sacrificing now your security. You're sacrificing decentralization. To that decentralization one, real quickly, I happen to run 2 nodes. I'm more than happy to say that publicly. What does that mean to say that David Rufner runs 2 nodes? These are 2 different copies on 2 different types of hardware of the whole ledger, the whole account of every Bitcoin transaction from 2009 through to the present. And I can share that with you because it's just a copy of all those transactions. It's not Bitcoin itself. I'm adding value to the network, but they're not valuable. You can't come to my house and take my nodes and have anything. My Bitcoin is not secured here locally. Okay, how about that? But check this out. Every transaction in Bitcoin since 2009, and both of those are running on 2 terabyte hard drives that cost about $25. And I still have about another 6 or 7 years before I need to upgrade hard drives. And hard drives keep getting cheaper, right? There have been some other networks that have out the gate said, we're much more scalable. But guess what? The data footprint that they're leaving, being much more scalable, is so huge that you now need to own server space, large servers, which is to say, yeah, they've got 5 total records of their ledger from the beginning of time till now, but it's 5 total ledgers, 5, and not 500,000 or something like this. It's 5, and they all reside at AWS, Amazon Web Services. Now we're back to that other language I used earlier, counterparty risk. I'm risking a lot because I'm trusting very few, So I love that trilemma thing. It's worth learning about. Look it up on ChatGPT or on Google. You'll see it. It's like 3 spokes, and then just start playing with that, thinking about it, read on it. It makes abundant sense, actually. And you're like, this Satoshi Nakamoto had to give something up at the base layer, and he gave the right thing up.
Yeah, in some ways, I also looked up how many Visa transactions per day, and there's 0.72 billion Visa transactions. So, David, you said 500,000 transactions on the Bitcoin network. So a listener might be listening and saying, well, okay, why doesn't Bitcoin just choose all 3? Why, Jared, are you saying you can only choose 2 of the 3? That's silly. I don't want a 2-legged stool. I want a 3-legged stool. Well, listener, this is what people have spent years, decades of their life trying to figure out. Since the 90s, people have been trying to figure out, how could we have electronic cash that's secure, that, right, you can't hack it. That's the security thing. If somebody can hack into the Bitcoin network and all of a sudden print twice as many Bitcoin as there are, or steal your Bitcoins, that's a really big problem, right? So security is extremely important. And then this whole thing of decentralization is key, because there was this thing called eCash, and they actually realized that, this is actually really centralized. The only way that you can pull this off is by one computer checking all the transactions and verifying them. And this was the invention of Bitcoin, was the recognition that you could decentralize this whole thing by incentivizing miners to use the SHA-256 algorithm to hash in and secure the Bitcoin network. So don't be too quick or too arrogant to think that you're going to somehow solve this trilemma and it's just silly that nobody's figured this out yet. Good luck. Learn coding, and by all means, nobody's stopping you. But what Bitcoin has done is unique. Two books that I would throw out that talk about the trilemma a little bit. Andreas Antonopoulos, I think, was maybe the first one to talk about the trilemma, and it's his book called Mastering Bitcoin, where he really talks about the technicals and really praises Satoshi Nakamoto. Andreas Antonopoulos wrote other books, Mastering Ethereum and other things, but his work on Bitcoin stands. The other one is Block Size Wars, and that book, I don't know if Satoshi had an opinion early on in the earliest days of how many transactions would be happening and block size and some of those things. There have been some interesting debates. People like Roger Ver and Craig Wright have argued that Satoshi's original vision was to have a scalable network, but it even doesn't matter what Satoshi's original vision was. What matters is who's running Bitcoin today, and the people that are running Bitcoin software, the developers, the node runners, they're the ones that determine what Bitcoin is today. And they have decisively chosen that scalability is not as interesting of a problem to them. Why? Because people have already figured out, Visa has already figured out how to make the transaction thing work. What is unique about Bitcoin is that no other nation state has a fixed money supply. And so that Bitcoin is decentralized and it's secure and has a fixed supply. Those things that's the killer app. That's the unique thing that Bitcoin does that no other cryptocurrency does. And so there's a real reason why Jared's chart showing Bitcoin just kind of blasting off into outer space and leaving S&P 500 and all those indexes and all other cryptocurrencies in the dust is because Satoshi Nakamoto and those who have come after Satoshi have put their finger on something really unique.
So I think this is a good time maybe to go, David, where you're going. But before we do that, I think we have to say, hey, then if I'm listening to that, how is that going to work? What do you mean not everybody can use Bitcoin? Like, sure, we just talked a little bit earlier about banks, right? Maybe that's a part of the solution. But what else can we do? How is Bitcoin going to scale for the world if it's going to be the currency everybody uses in the future?
There's a host of existing, improving, and proposed what they call second layer solutions that are going to be there for that. So back to it, you looked up, what was it, 0.2 billion Visa transactions per day?
0.72, yeah.
0.72, okay. If Bitcoin were to do that, by the way, they could. Instead of blocks every 10 minutes, it would be every 30 seconds or something. And instead of blocks being 4 megabytes in size or smaller, roughly, there's more to it than that, we'd increase them to 100 megabytes. And we could fit Visa-sized transactions in there. But now, again, this is kind of fun. Now we follow through the problem. Now my node would cease to work within a month. I'd tap out my 2 terabyte hard drive. I'd have to start reaching for some really expensive hard drives. And even then, I would not be able to afford to do that. And so we would have a growing decentralization, which means more and more we're having to say to fewer people, or they say to us, fewer people, just trust us. Now we're back to the U.S. government with the dollar, full faith and credit of the U.S. government, just trust us. And we're saying, hey, we're all fallen. Let's remove the temptation to misuse or abuse trust by choosing not to put trust in people when and where we don't have to. Certainly here at my house, there's plenty of trust being given and lent and exercised, right? But I don't really want to have a monetary system that's based on trust. I just really don't. So that's just to show that example. Well, these layer twos, the most notable one, the longest lived one at this point, is called the Lightning Network. It alone has the ability to do all these transactions per second that like Visa, MasterCard, and the like have. It exists already. We've talked about a Bitcoin itself and then a layer two as tools. There's other people saying, okay, I appreciate your Lightning Network, but I find it wanting in these regards. So there's people, there I go, fuzzy again. There's people out there building now other layer two solutions. And this should actually thrill us because now there's a marketplace of ideas where sharper and sharper tools can be brought, forward. And it's just not a problem. But again, if we did try and solve everything, all these transactions on that first layer, we would definitely give up scalability and decentralization. I'm sorry, for the sake of scalability, we would give up decentralization. And then we're right back to square one. Honestly, we're right back to abuse by people who maybe set out intending well, but then fudge and then fudge more. I mean, we're right back in the same place. So God bless it. Of all the legs of the stool to give up at the first layer, give up that scalability and know that some really smart people from all over the world are coming up with solutions to scale it up on the second layer. And by the way, when our money worked the best and we were pegged to gold, that's actually what was taking place there as well. The real value was the gold, but it's heavy. It's not very, it's not very portable. It's hard to send to long distances, all of this. And so we came up with a second layer on top of it. The issue in American life, and this is world history as well, that again, people began fudging that and lying about the actual gold they had. It's much harder to lie about Bitcoin because of node operators like me. I can go check, does that wallet have that amount of Bitcoin in it? That type of thing. I'll stop. I got too far in the weeds there. I apologize.
Well, I would only say, there are these second layers, Lightning. I don't think I've ever used Lightning. And hot take here, as a Bitcoiner, I don't really care too much about Lightning because as long as there are exchanges, then I'm good. So the only time that I use the Bitcoin network is when I buy Bitcoin. And I do that once a week, dollar cost averaging in. And I've made some bigger purchases where one time kind of one-off sort of lump sum buying some Bitcoin. But I don't use the Bitcoin network that much. Bitcoin for me is a savings technology, pure and simple. That is, for me, the killer app. That's the use case. It is a better vehicle to save value than any other vehicle that I know of. And I've tried all kinds of different stuff in the stock market, thought that I was smart, and even my best investments that I did a ton of research on have absolutely paled in comparison to the savings that I've done in Bitcoin. So I'm fine with Bitcoin not being that scalable as long as anybody that wants to use the Bitcoin network for a simple transaction to buy some money, to buy some Bitcoin that they're going to save for a while. I think Bitcoin is perfectly suited for that kind of an approach.
Absolutely. And I think that, to what David maybe you were saying, is that's not flashy, right? It's not sexy, if you will, even. But yet that's exactly what we're after. It's exactly what we need. I mean, every year it seems like around the end of the year, beginning of the year, you see memes and people on X, Twitter, whatever, saying things like, well, hey, I'm not a hedge fund, but I outperformed every single hedge fund this year just by buying Bitcoin. And it took me no time and I didn't do any research. I literally just bought Bitcoin and that's all I did. And
Well,
it's,
yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, Ben, I don't disagree with you at all for my personal use. And yet I'm looking down the line and hearing about incredible technologies that are coming that would need the ability of microtransactions for micro value. I mean, the organization I work for, we run a host of podcasts. We're still really on what can be described as 1.0 podcast architecture, and yet already existing 2.0 architecture is there. And what's fun about 2.0 architecture? When you give a like in the middle of let's say a podcast, it marks where that like was given. I, as the podcast producer, like us, can find out, hey, Ben and Jared, something happened at the 17-minute mark that really delighted people. They not only gave thumbs up, but the act of giving a thumb up to make sure it's not a bot, right? Which is out there, a bot farm out there giving you false likes. The very act of giving the thumbs up or the hooray or whatever it is gives a microtransaction of like some amount of satoshis, and you can program it. It could be 5 satoshis, it could be 5,000 satoshis. You can program how strong you want your like to be. So micropayments there, or the AI world that's coming out. There's talk about, well, right now they're just trying to get adoption. They're spending that venture capitalist money. They have not fully monetized these. Eventually, the chat GPTs of the world will have to be monetized. And at that point, they're going to look for what's a way to get real-time payments with the least amount of slippage. If they're going to use, MasterCard and Visa, there's a lot of slippage there. There's the 3 to 5% fees that MasterCard gets, and it takes a full 30 days to fully settle that type of stuff. Well, with the Lightning Network, again, I've used it very, very little, Ben. Again, my disclosure, I know of it. I've dabbled in it. I do not spend, we're talking once a year I've played with it. But it has the ability to give instant final settlement now with like near zero slippage, in the fees. So yeah, it can be thrilling.
I totally agree with that. There are some very interesting use cases. I was just I logged on to the new Nostr app Primal. Have you guys used that? And it's, I don't know, for me, it was still just as clunky as Damus. But I came back to a post on Nostr that I had liked and reposted by Odell, and he said that when social media posts are not monetized, attention is given to the angriest posts, and on Nostr, the most attention goes to the posts that get zapped the most, that get a few sats sent to them, and they're always positive. And so he mentions in this post that micropayments on social media posts might be the key to make social media positive and useful again. That's a fascinating thing, and I don't disagree. There are all kinds of reasons why a second layer system like Lightning is very interesting. I think my only point is just, if somebody would try to kind of point at Bitcoin and say, see, I'm not going to invest in Bitcoin because it can't do as many transactions as Visa, then I think you're kidding yourself that you've sort of gotten one leg up on Bitcoin and you've written it off far too soon. That was my only kind of.
For sure, it's fascinating because if they had applied that same logic to anything that their retirement savings are linked with or into, they'd have gone to their employer long ago and say, stop putting my money in there. Just hand me the cash. It's a knife that cuts too far. Yeah, that's right. It's a red herring as well. So.
And I think even the fact that we're sort of like going around talking about scalability use cases just shows all the more how it's not that important, right? Like, the priority of security decentralization is a more important thing when we can't even necessarily come up with this is the reason why we need to do this thing. So I know we're at an hour here, but I kind of want to end with this idea of why Bitcoin and not everything else. And I think the phrase I would use, I've used it a few times on the podcast, is incentives, I'm going to use it, incentives in what it promotes within me. That, right? We've talked about how Jesus, when we ask, what does Jesus think about Bitcoin? Well, he's after the heart. He wants our whole self. And it's not that Bitcoin is the Holy Spirit. Only the Holy Spirit through the Word of God can create, form, save, make more holy, sanctify me. But everything we do, I truly believe this, everything we do does shape and form us in different ways. That James K. Smith, you are what you love, is a very real thing. And so when we think about Bitcoin versus everything else, I think Bitcoin promotes within us, forms within us more healthy desires. So you think about altcoins. We've talked about how they go up really quickly and then sometimes go down. You got to watch the charts. You got to know what you're doing. And so what is that promoting you? I think it promotes greed. I think it promotes a get rich quick sort of mindset that, well, I got to get a lot as quick as I can because I got to ride this train while it's going up, and then I need to jump out and catch the parachute out before it, blows up in the sky. I think Bitcoin promotes within us and forms within us a focus on the future, because if I think like Larry Fink does, if I think Bitcoin is going to 700 or a million, well, then that means I want to get the most of that for my kids, for my grandkids, for the future, so that then they can have the things that they want to do, steward the stuff that they have, all those sort of things. And what that's going to mean then is, well, maybe I don't need the most new iPhone. Maybe I don't need to spend all of my money on this new toy, this new gadget, but instead I need to buy some Bitcoin here and there. And even we've talked a lot on the podcast too about how Bitcoin promotes within us, or at least invites in the world around us, a love of neighbor too. That there's a real sense in which living in this network together actually is about caring for other people, that it's clear, that it's honest, that no one has 100% power and authority, versus other cryptocurrencies that people don't have those things. It's unclear. Other people have power. I'm not claiming all ill will against anyone who's ever ran a different cryptocurrency. Don't hear me out saying that, but it is a very different thing. And so when we think about the world that Bitcoin even invites and brings in, is a much more focused on love for other people. Because if I'm less focused on me getting rich today, having the most money to buy the most yachts and Lamborghinis that I can buy, well, then I can focus more on loving my neighbor. I can focus more on serving them and providing for them in need. And even we've talked too, can Bitcoin fix the world? No, only Jesus Christ can do that. But can Bitcoin invoke a world that is a little bit more just, fair, because of the system that we all function with? Absolutely. And that also is a love of neighbor too. So anything else you guys want to add as far as like, what are the sort of formative effects of Bitcoin in life versus maybe an altcoin or something like that?
My answer would go back to the way I started this podcast, because I can't get my friends in Africa out of my mind and my heart now that I've been there and met them. And the question that I have is, if I were going to, and I'm seriously thinking about this, PLI is seriously thinking about this, how do we best help our global partners around the world think about a holistic approach to human flourishing, which the gospel very much cares about, because Jesus Christ is risen from the dead in the body. And so our entire bodily existence matters. And so if I'm going to think about my African neighbors, what am I going to say to them concerning Bitcoin or any altcoins? What I'm not going to say is you should invest in this new latest fad because we're still early and you might get in early and then really be able to ride this to the moon. I can't in good conscience tell people who are scraping by on just a fraction of what people in America live on, that they might get in early on some big pump and dump investment. Rather, the reason that I would point them to Bitcoin is because the slow chug upwards You can't deny it. And I would ask, how are the central banks doing for you in Argentina or in Kenya or in Uganda? And the clear answer for all the developing countries is that the central banks have been devastating to them and incredibly inhumane. And so I don't trust other cryptocurrencies to solve the problem that the central banks have created. But fascinatingly, even Christine Lagarde, the head of the European Central Bank, just said the other day that she will not allow European Union sovereign wealth funds to own Bitcoin. Why? Because she is fundamentally opposed to Bitcoin over any other cryptocurrency. And for me, I will do the exact opposite of what Christine Lagarde says.
And I can come along. I want to say, because you asked us, Ben gave his answer, not mine. Ben, awesome answer. Like, I want my kids, who I'm about ready to reference, to listen to that answer. I do. And at the same time, with those kids in mind, I can look clearly in the camera, talk to my friends here, talk to friends elsewhere, that, my research says in past years that outside of Bitcoin, the best thing for my kids to do, the first chance they have, is to lever up. Borrow, borrow, borrow. Borrow early, so that over the course of the first couple of years will be tough, but over the course of time, as inflation takes place and you get paid more, it'll be more dollars in your paycheck, but the purchasing power sucks as that goes up. But your loan payment will stay the same for your house, for your car, whatever, and it'll become a smaller proportion of all that you have. So lever up early and often, and then play this dismal game. Outside of Bitcoin, that would be the advice I'd be left to give my children. And yet I'm having conversations with them, and this is where it comes right alongside of Ben and Jared, but it's just in full agreement. I now can actually talk to my children about saving in a way that doesn't just preserve, but a fancy word, accretes, gathers unto itself more purchasing power over time. Suddenly, like, I'm not. I don't have a dismal view of their future. I know in their vocations they're going to serve their neighbors. That's not my worry, actually. That we'll deal with that. That won't be all easy street, but I know that they will serve their neighbors. My concern is for their daily bread, bodily life, as they care for their own. But suddenly in Bitcoin, the message isn't lever up, my dearies. The message is you could save. You can save and be taken care of in those things. And that, for this guy, along with my wife, who stopped out and said hi before we hit record to the guys earlier, boy, that is a hopeful thing from a parent's heart for your kids. And as you said, then Ben, if for the kids, then it's for neighbors, it's for friends across the globe. Heck, it's even for enemies. It might, in fact, diminish some of the frictions between peoples that leads us to call them enemies. So that's it. No longer does the message have to be lever up. Suddenly we can talk meaningfully about saving again.
That's so good, David. I don't have anything else. We're at an hour and 18. Is there one thing, without adding too much here, is there anything you think we missed? Anything you think, hey, I mean, I know one for me, I know we didn't talk about proof of work versus, oh my gosh, I'm thinking the other one. I'm spacing out.
Proof of stake,
yeah, proof of stake, right. And so I think that's one there, but we've referenced that in the past, but anything that we've missed, you think?
The only thing that I would say, and again, this is not investment advice, but my own experience tells me, because I've invested in all these other altcoins, I was very interested in proof of stake and how it would work and what it would be like as an investment. And if you do your own research and you want to experiment with these things, try out, watch how much you invest, put the same amount of money and just watch how your investments play out. Do the grand experiment, do your own research, and just watch these things. My experience is that you're going to lose money in anything else besides Bitcoin. At least that's what my experience has been over the long haul.
It's also true that most of us maximalist Bitcoiners who are trying to encourage you to only invest in Bitcoin, guess what? As Ben said earlier, I don't, Jared, did you say it as well? We didn't do that. We dabbled in several. We came about it the hard way. So, you can go about it the hard way if you want. I think that's what you just said, Ben. Go for it. Dabble a little bit. But I think you're going to come to that conviction that many, many already have. So you can dabble, you can put it to the test, or you can maybe, in this case, trust the word of some others a bit while you do your own research.
Well said. Well said. So, why Bitcoin, not crypto? But maybe we just should have said, don't be like us. Buy Bitcoin only.
That's it.
Much less sexy title, but I think it's exactly what we're trying to say to people too. So, thank you so much for being here. Hopefully you stuck with us to the end. If you disagree with us, please let us know. If you think there's one thing that you've got that says, no, this is why this one is better, please let us know. We'd love to talk with you. If there's something you think we should go deeper into, like, hey, what about this thing? Talk more about that. Please let us know. Basically, if you're watching this, if you're with us, we'd love to know you're here. Thank you. We'll see you on the next one.